Go get
Okay, Karen, why don't you try again?
So when I saw the study from 2022, that's why I said I didn't know he was still doing water work. And then you sent me the obituary from 2014. Obviously, I did not know. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. We do have some attendees, one of which is probably Dave.
Michael Laredo is Dave. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm on.
And Alvin's there too. All right. It's all coming together.
All right, I'm sorry. I don't know what that was all about, but here we are.
Happy New Year, Karen.
Happy New Year,
Yeah.
friend. And everyone.
And everyone, yes.
All
Come on,
right.
Alvin.
All
There
right.
we
Happy
go.
New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year, Alvin.
All right.
Okay.
Get
Sorry.
started here.
Sarah, can you move Dave over, or does he not want to? Where it says Michael Laredo, it's Dave.
Okay,
Okay. 1, 2, 3. You ready to start?
Let's do it.
Okay, I'm trying to cut my phone off. Okay,
It's good.
call to order the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District Water Supply Meeting for January 8, 2024. And the time is 3:07. Okay, can we have roll call, please?
Director Riley,
Here,
Director Paul,
Here.
Chair Edwards.
Here.
All committee members are present.
Do we have any members of the public for public comment? You have 3 minutes. Any members of the public?
Chair
We do-
Edwards, I see no raised hands.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we do have 3 members of the public currently, but no raised hands.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to the first item. Jan, what's the first item?
The first item is to consider adoption of the November meeting minutes.
Okay. Any comments on the meetings for the
The minutes, not for me.
None?
no,
Do we have a first and second?
I move approval.
Second.
And we have a second. Roll call vote?
Director Paul,
Yes.
Director Riley,
Yes,
Chair Edwards.
Yes, and I forgot any members of the public wanted to make any public comments on it.
I see no raised hands, Chair Edwards.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Jan, what's the next item?
All these items are verbal reports. This first one, item 2, is preliminary results of the water supply and demand assessment. This is in anticipation of our phase 2 testimony, which is going to go in about 2.5 weeks, I believe. 2 weeks, maybe. And I wanted to give you a glimpse of what we're doing and then some summary results. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to take you deep into the weeds to begin, just so you understand what we're up to. And then I'll try to do a little less of that.
Cool.
So you see in front of you a bunch of numbers. And this is a spreadsheet, but I want to kind of lay out for you what the analysis does. We have a hydrogeological cycle of about 59 years of data. And rather than use our interpretation of those 59 years of data, we've actually used CalAM's interpretation from the testimony of Paul Findlay, which also is a testimony of Ian Crooks in an earlier submittal to the PUC. And what we do is we take that series of hydrology as it affects the water supplies that we deem to be affected by drought. There are also water supplies that are not affected by drought. And so the ones that are not affected by drought in general are the Carmel River water right, the Seaside Basin water right, the Seaside Basin wheeled amount of water, and Malpaso, which is the Clint Eastwood water entitlement, and the pure water Monterey base. So there are these 5. And when I say not affected by drought, that is because let's take, for example, the Carmel River. The aquifer under the river holds about 28,458 acre feet of usable storage. The Cal-Am water right is 3,376. The non-Cal-Am pumpers are on the order of 2,000. When it rains, you can get more through the Table 13 water rights. But what you would find is during drought, well, what we know from past experiences during a normal year, certainly during an above normal wet or extremely wet year, 1 6 to 8 week period of normal flows in the river refills the aquifer to more than 95%. And so if you consider there's 26, 27, 28,000 acre feet at that level, then basically when it's full, there's approximately a 5-year supply. And what we've also learned is even during dry years, there is some rainfall. And below normal years, there is some rainfall. So typically, we've never hit a 5-year drought period where there is insufficient storage that in the 4th or 5th year, that Cal-Am water right would be affected. So therefore, we deem the Carmel River as always having sufficient storage to meet a 5-year drought supply. And as you begin to look through the record, it's really fascinating how every drought period was either followed by or preceded by a normal, above normal, wet or extremely wet years. So this concept of it refilling has actually borne out in history. The Seaside Basin, similarly, certainly if there's no rainfall during a 5-year period, it's getting stressed. But we've never had an experience where the legal right to pump was affected by a 5-year drought period. So we deem the Seaside Basin to be unaffected by drought. The Seaside Basin wheel, this is just a recognition that Montage has about 7.1, 7.2 acre feet that they've purchased from other pumpers under the Seaside adjudication. And the Ascent project, which is now grading in Seaside, will be using approximately 13 acre feet. And similar to the Seaside Basin pumpers, these are Seaside Basin pumpers. They're just alternative pumpers. And so we deem theirs as not being impacted by drought. Malpaso is also derived from the Carmel River and an amount of 86 acre feet of production. For the same reasons as the Carmel River, we deem that not to be affected. And then Pure Water Monterey comes from a variety of different sources, but we have a first claim for purposes of the Pure Water Monterey system. And so drought impacts tend to affect the second claim, folks. All in, there's maybe, let's call it 8,000 acre feet of available water. We need about 4,300 acre feet to yield the 3,500 of production. So that too is less affected by drought. Over on the water supplies affected by drought, we're going to admit that Pure Water Monterey expansion is going to be nominally affected by drought. The analysis shows about 145 acre feet per year during drought. It's actually the net of 345 acre feet of shortfall borrowed from reserves and then backfilled in the winter for about 200 acre feet. So that's why you see during this gray drought period, a slightly reduced amount from the expansion. Aquifer storage and recovery is affected by its hydrologic cycle. So it can vary based on what type of water year we're in. And we've admitted here that Sand City desal has lagged in its performance. We did notice some deficiency during the drought period last time, but it's really not crystal clear from the data that they have a direct impact from drought. But we do know that as you get less rainwater, surface water in the perch sand dune aquifer, that you have greater and greater trouble at meeting the discharge requirement on the saltiness of the discharge. So we've assumed in a normal year, it's about 200 acre-feet per year. That's based on assuming that they get their new replacement intake well brought online by the time this whole thing takes place. And that if you enter a drought, that by the second year, we're going to say it runs at a 20% diminished capacity. So then we line up all of these supplies and we say, all right, we're going to have a base year, which is just, let's say, the last year before the pure water expansion comes online in 2025. Then we'll have the first year, the second year, the third year, the fourth year, and so on. And what we've done is we say, we want to start in drought, and we want to start in a 5-year drought to really stress test the supply analysis. And lo and behold, we had a 5-year drought from 1987 to 1991. So we take those 59 years of hydrologic data, we begin them in 1987, we run them all the way out to 2021, and then we pick up where they started again in 1963 and run it out to its final place in 1986. So we have actual hydrologic data that then underpins what's going on with aquifer storage and recovery. And in this particular instance, we'll talk about the basic assumptions in a second. This is constrained by the pipeline up over the hill through the crest tank and coming down through Montera. And that constraint was reflected in CalAM's own testimony, as I mentioned earlier. And then we have Sand City desal, as discussed. You have total water available. Well, we compare total water available in any one year to total water demand. And water demand is comprised of residential water demand and non-residential water demand.
Dave,
Yes,
excuse me, can we pause for a question?
absolutely.
Okay, before you go to demand, because you lost me when you were explaining the impact of prolonged drought on the ASR.
Right. So
so-
ASR.
I mean, I know it's impacted by the rainfall.
Right. And so what's reflected, so the assumption of pure water Monterey expansion is in a dry year, and it could be dry, critically dry, it's going to underperform by a certain amount. That amount's been defined as in the 400 acre feet, but there's backflush water within the plant that makes up enough of it. So they lose 345 acre feet of source water that has to be found from somewhere else. But in aquifer storage and recovery, your ability to inject the ability in any one season to use real-time water is based on how much it rains.
Yes, I understand that part.
And so real-time water would be 0, 0, 0, 0. So if you did need to depend on this water, it doesn't exist. And so if you're, we tend to say that on average, you're going to get this 1,300 acre feet, which you see up here under my cursor.
Yes, yes.
Well, you wouldn't get it there, and really, first time you'd get it would be the 7th year in based on rainfall.
Uh-huh.
So to the extent you need this water, you may end up with a shortfall when you compare total water available with total demand. And if you do have a shortfall, you're going to have to borrow from stored water, which is what's going on over here.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've done by running the actual hydrology for ASR through the system and starting in a drought is we've recognized that, yes, in fact, you're going to have an in current year deficit from ASR in a drought year. So if you don't have storage, and in this particular case, by starting in drought and only having 1,300 acre feet starting in storage, to the extent you really needed 1,300 acre feet a year to meet any of these, you're short, and you would over borrow your available storage. But what we're going to discover is, so even though on average, so just a base year, a generic year, when you add all these up, assuming average yield of 1,300 acre feet from ASR, you're going to have 12,200 acre feet of water available typically. But in actuality, you see, as you enter drought, you don't get that. You're going to have 10 something. And so over time, you'll see this is our 10-year average demand. So even if we had 10.7 or 10,700 in the near term, that's more than enough for the average demand. But as demand grows, if this is all we ever have, we're going to have a problem, because demand will outgrow supply if we're stuck in this area. But what we've noticed is Cal-Am has always ignored the impact of carryover storage on their entire analysis. What we're doing is we're saying, you can't do that. You do store water if you don't use it. And our contract with Cal-Am for Pure Water Monterey is $57.50 per year delivered, and you take it. You pay for it, you take it. Well, in a drought year, you would see, because of this little shortfall, we wouldn't be able to deliver $57.50. We would not meet the contractual obligation. So we would have to either take from the operating reserve, where we have water. We could compel Cal-Am to take from stored water, but if they've already paid for it, they're going to have a little difficulty doing that. So we may want to identify water that we start sticking in the ground today over and above our operating reserve as additional reserves,
Yes.
or it comes from the ASR reserve. So what I've done in this analysis, I said, we're putting water in the ground either from surplus from ASR and Pure Water Monterey, or ASR if there's no surplus from Pure Water Monterey. But the gist of it is, total supply compared to total demand either creates a surplus or a deficit. And we say, let's let it start in drought with a nominal savings account already sitting there waiting for us, which is how much is in the ground today. And then let it run out 59 years and let's see what happens. So that's the principle. And again, those 59 years, these are real water year types based on the unimpaired stream flow of the river in each of these actual years. So we're using real data, and we're using real data that, for purposes of ASR, Cal-Am has actually used in their own study. They just failed to recognize the carry forward storage aspect of ASR in their own. They ignored the S in ASR. So leaving this one, I've summarized what we have.
So you're using projections based on the actual data from the past.
Correct. So those supplies, that we deem not affected by drought in the first year, the second year, or the 20th year, we assume will always be available at these amounts.
Yeah.
The variability is really these three that are affected somewhat by drought. As we talked about, Pure Water Monterey expansion, the current thinking is, yeah, let's admit we're going to be 145 acre feet per dry year short, that we're going to have to find somewhere to meet the 5750 acre feet total delivery obligation. ASR, let's admit, in any given year, if it's not raining, to get that average yield of 1,300, and Cal-Am thinks that average yield is closer to 1,200. So we've got a bit of a difference of opinion, but we're going to use their data anyway. We're going to have to find water from storage to get the average yield from ASR should we need it. And same thing with Sand City D-cell. The faceplate on Sand City D-cell is 300 acre feet. There were a couple of years where it ran at greater than 260, closer to 280 acre feet. We are starting with saying it's going to be at 200 acre feet, assuming they get a new injection well permitted by 2 years from now. And we're even recognizing that there may be some, 20% diminished rate of return during dry periods, at least beginning the second year, even though the data doesn't completely show that. On the demand side, our starting point is going to be to use the AMBAG's adopted 2022 regional growth forecast, where we're using population for residential water use. And we're going to use job growth as a proxy for non-residential water use. So we did scenario one, as I was kind of walking you through the weeds on that spreadsheet. We cycled hydrology through a 55-year history, 1963 to 1921. We shifted to start in a 5-year drought, beginning in 1987, and then pick up the rest of it later. This one assumes ASR gets up to 17 acre feet per day if available. Obviously, if it's a critically dry year and there's no rainfall in that year, you won't have anything. But the 17 acre feet is an assumption that was verified by CalAM's expert witness, assuming that the constraint is the Segunda pipeline up through Tehama and down through Montero. Pure water expansion borrows 145 acre feet in drought years, and this is based on the repeated requests from folks in the Salinas Valley, folks on Monterey One Water's own board, and other detractors saying, prove the source water. Where's the source water? We don't think you're going to have source water in dry years. And they've looked at it every which way since Monday. And the conclusion is that there will be a shortfall. It's in the 400 acre feet. There's on-site usage that offsets some of it. It's 345 in a typical dry year. And 200 of that can be repaid in the wetter winter months, but from June through September, June, July, August, September, they need to go find 345 acre feet for the expansion that's not realistically readily available in those months. But net in the entire water year, because of that repayment, it's 145 acre feet of shortfall. We talked about Sand City diminishing after a second year of drought, and the demand growth rates. What we did back when we adopted in 2022 our own supply and demand strategy is we mapped production to each jurisdiction and to residential versus non-residential growth. We determined that the growth rate in population equates to about 18 acre feet per year in residential use, and the growth rate in job growth would result in about 13.44 acre feet per year as a constant annual growth rate in non-residential water use. And we start with about just under 1,400 in storage, which is where we are today. We don't know where we'll end up. Just so you all know, there's no report on ASR because we've not met our in-stream flow requirements yet. So we're getting rain, but we're not storing any of it yet. And primarily that's because the lagoon opened early. And that means we're looking at the 120 cubic feet per second in-stream flow requirement instead of the 40 at Highway 1 gate. So ASR has not started injection yet. So we don't know how much storage we'll have at the end of the year But in this particular scenario one, we said, well, this is how much we have today. Let's start with that. So that's what we ran in scenario one. Then we came in and said, okay, this 17 acre feet ASR assumption typically can't be met if we don't have access to injection well number 3, which we learned last year. So if we limit to only 13.3 acre feet per day if available, meaning injection only in ASR 1 and 2, that reduces this availability to 13.3. So we changed the ASR data in scenario 2. In scenario 3, we said, okay, same as the previous one, but what if this borrowing and payback of 200 acre feet, you don't get your 200 acre feet back? Why don't we just go ahead and say we have to find 345 acre feet in a dry year for pure water Monterey expansion? And then scenario 4, we said, same thing, but let's double the demand. So we doubled both the 18 acre feet per year of residential and the 13.44 acre feet per year on non-residential. Now keep in mind, before the CDO kicked in 2009, the entire community was only averaging 16 acre feet per year. And yes, there were some limitations, like Pacific Grove kind of had over allocated. You couldn't set new meters beginning with the CDO, so that 16 dropped to like 12. But in the earlier scenario, we're talking about 18 plus 13.4, just about 32 acre feet per year. Now we're talking about doubling all of that to like 64 acre feet per year. That's pretty significant. Then scenario 5, we said, all right, let's keep scenario 4. But beginning in year 6, let's go ahead and say we're going to do in-lieu recharge in the Seaside Basin. This is something that Cal-Am has said they would do with when the desal plant comes online. They leave water that they could pump in the ground for a 25-year period. Now, this may change to 26 or 27 years based on the delay in getting to the point of in-lieu recharge, but it's still pretty close to what Cal-Am would like to commit to do. So this, again, diminishes how much water is available on the supply side. Scenario 6, we then say, well, we went through it last year. Sometimes Cal-Am has problems with the Carmel Valley wells during ASR season. So instead of the ASR assumption of only injection in wells 1 and 2 and maxing out at 13 acre feet when you can, let's take every ASR year and say it only performs at 75%. So you never get more than 9.7%. And in a year that, I'm sorry, 9.7 acre feet per year. And in years that don't perform at the full capability of that 13.3, you'll get even less. It'll be 75% of whatever you could get in whatever water year you were in at that time.
Dave, just quickly, that's 75% is 75% of 1,300, right?
Well, at this point, it's 75. Yeah, it would be 75% on average of the 1,300. If we're saying, yeah, the average yield is 1,300,
Yeah.
but in a particular year, you'll see if only 0 could come off the river because there was no rain, and 75% of 0 is still 0. So in that year, you're only going to get 0. So we're trying to move away from our talk about average yield, that 1,300, and we're saying, all right, ignore the average yield. We now have 59 years of actual performance data, and then, but your actual performance data yields on average 17 acre feet per day if the rain is available because of constraints. We're going to constrain ourselves further to 13. And then this one says we're going to constrain ourselves even further to 75% of whatever's available up to 13. So the max you would ever have is 9.7, because let's just assume Cal-Am is going to have trouble somewhere in the valley. And that somewhere in the valley trouble happens every single one of those 59 years. And we only get 75% of what was shown in the record. And then scenario 7, we said all of these things through scenario 6, but get rid of the starting balance in the savings account. And then in scenario 8, we said, let's get crazy and we'll triple the residential demand. So it's 3 times the AMBAG rate, or basically like 54 acre feet per year for residential growth and 26 acre feet per year for non-residential growth, which is, you know, an enormous amount of water going out for development. And the results show
So
that,
Dave, I have another quick question about your scenarios. When you say same, do you mean same as the original?
no,
form?
it's cumulative at this point.
That was my question. That was
Yeah.
my question. Each one is an added dilemma faced by the projections you're making.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we said, well, we're pretty comfortable with scenario 1 representing reality. And we could get 17 acre feet per day if Cal-Am would get their redundant production wells or extraction wells built in the Seaside Basin. You know, it's supposed to do 4 of them. We'd love to see 1 and 2 get done on the school property and 3 and 4 get done at Fitch Park. So let's assume they do. This is a reasonable assumption then that in the rainier season, so in an extremely wet year, a wet year, and above normal, and even a normal year, you'll have many days that you can get 17 acre.
So just for my kind of understanding the approach you're taking, scenario 1 is what you project based on all the data that's available and recent patterns, as well as whatever AMBAG and other components of your approach has been. Scenario 2 discounts a piece of that. Scenario 3 further discounts it. 4. So it's a worst case scenario the deeper you go in the scenarios.
Exactly. And
Okay.
And each one of these accumulates either a decrease in the available supply, or like in scenario 4, an increase in customer demand.
Yeah,
And
got
it
it.
continues to exacerbate it. And if you think about it, and I've said this more than once, so this isn't a surprise, but I think Cal-Am's testimony to date is attempting to undersell the supply options and overstate the demand forecast. And when you do that, you create a crisis that happens much sooner on the time horizon that then can only be solved with a desal plant.
Right.
So we're trying to do the same thing here in incremental steps. All right, let's increase our demand. Let's take out 700 acre feet of supply for 25 years because they do need to eventually replenish the basin. Let's not wait for a desal plant to do that. Let's suck it up and do it now. Okay, now let's, on top of all of that, let's say that ASR is, this would be our doubly worst scenario. Not only can we not get 17 acre feet because we're going to see that maybe we don't have access to ASR injection well number 3 and 4 because the extraction well, redundant extraction wells didn't get built. So now we're just down to 1 and 2. We did that earlier, but now let's say even with 1 and 2, there's other problems that diminish any of those rainfalls by 25% due to a lost well, a pump station being out, who knows what it is. This is the Cal-Am operational limitation scenario. And then this is a minor one, but let's say we had no starting storage balance at the beginning. Maybe that'll have an impact because we're starting with a drought and we're relying on stored water. And does that hurt us? And then we said, all right, there are people out there who say, you know, there's pent up demand and you're going to grow much faster than you think. Well, there's an actual answer to that, and then there's the kind of,
Chicken Little.
yeah, and the actual answer is, well, if you did grow gangbusters in the immediate, if there really was a snapback or, pent up demand, then you're going to grow slower after that. We're trying to capture it in a regular annual growth rate. But let's just say housing was built faster because Monterey really went out and knocked the cover off the ball in its RENA effort, or whatever it is. So let's triple the residential demand, but the non-residential is still back here in scenario 4 at double. So we only messed with the residential. But keep in mind, residential demand is 65% of the equation. So we've now tripled residential demand way beyond what we think the growth forecast says it should be. But yeah, we're at this point where let's just keep piling it on, and piling it on.
Got it. Thank you.
And what falls out of that analysis is, in the first scenario, which is reasonable enough, you've got an available supply of 50 to meet 59 years, the full cycle, and have almost 80,000 acre feet sitting in storage at the end of that cycle. And what that is telling you is, between the excess Pure Water Monterey expansion and the excess ASR due to the rainfall cycles, you're building up more water than you can use in any of the years where there's a shortfall. Same thing in scenario 2, same thing in scenario 3, same thing in scenario 4. Well, keep in mind, scenario 4, we doubled the demand, and in scenario 3, we started in lieu recharge in the Seaside Basin. So those were two pretty big offsets. So now we're heading in a direction. Scenario 5, you've got 53 years worth, and your storage goes to 0 at the end of this 53. Scenario 6, 41 years worth. Scenario 7, 39 years worth. Scenario 8, 27 years worth. So in almost all cases, you make it out to the 30th year. Now, granted, you've run out of storage, so you're going to need a new water supply to produce current water in a current year. Somewhere out in that 30, 25 year basis. But this is a scenario that we have trouble even believing could exist. Nevertheless, what we're going to do with this data is wrap it up into a report that will probably look a little bit more like a water shortage contingency component to an urban water management plan, and it will satisfy certain aspects of the California Water Code. The data is defensible. The results, once I run this through district engineer and John Lear, once we're all internally comfortable with the numbers, that there's not some egregious mistake, this is going to drive our testimony to say, nowhere in here is a desal plant that costs at a minimum 10 times what Pure Water Monterey expansion is going to cost and produces 3 times the water that's obviously unneeded. No way is that in the interest of ratepayers. Now, the dilemma that we have is, you mentioned Chicken Little earlier. We've been like the little kid in the class with our hands up saying, we have the answer. We know the answer. And to date, no one from the PUC has called on us, nor have they said, that's really interesting. Let's get to the bottom of this. So we're going to try again. But all indications, and remember this agenda item is preliminary results, but all indications are there is more than enough water under a reasonable set of assumptions when you use storage as an option to meet the needs of the Monterey Peninsula. And yeah, you could have 7 years of drought. Yeah, you could have a demand spike if 3 hotels came online at the same time and housing got built all at once. But that spike would be offset by lesser growth in subsequent years. It's hard to fathom that there's any worse set of assumptions than what we've gone through that would lead to the conclusion that you need a new water supply beyond pure water expansion in the 10 to 15 year horizon.
I have a question.
Go ahead there, Karen.
Yeah, thank you. I understand that a lot of these sort of worst case scenario, like way bigger demand increasing 2-3 times faster are unlikely, very unlikely. But one that I'm thinking about is the because of climate change, a much worse drought scenario than in the past. A longer drought. Do any of these scenarios consider that situation?
Right, and the answer is no, primarily because the California Water Code doesn't require looking beyond a 5-year drought. And you may remember Hans Isler's letter to us was, do a water supply assessment with a normal year, a 1-year drought, or 1 dry year, and a 5-year or a multiple year drought. And the multiple year drought that all the planners have fallen onto is 5 years. I do think you're right that we may see lengthy dry periods that are longer. But what we're also seeing, and last year was a good example of it, is more intense storms with a different frequency. So it may be that we don't actually have less water for our type of climate, but it may all happen in bigger events.
Mm.
And we do better with ASR when there are medium-sized events and more of them kind of separated out by 7 and 10 days at a time. But it's not clear that we're not going to get our average rainfall because of this tendency towards higher intensity, shorter duration rainfall. So, I mean, we could do either one. The problem is then we get into, well, it's not a problem. I mean, we could string together, for example, you could take that first 5-year drought that I have in here, and you could just put it back to back, and you'd have a 10-year drought and say, all right, we just use this, the data twice, and let's look at that stream flow and what impact it has on ASR. We could do something like that.
That may be the question just asked, may be a reason why to explain some steps in the scenario toward worst case. You might say, you might anticipate some question from the PUC or whatever about that. And the answer is we've accommodated less of X or Y or whatever with this discounted approach.
Well, and think about it, because this is exactly the kind of exercise where you get in a room and you go, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? But you may get comfortable saying, yeah, we probably should look at 10-year drought, but are we going to start in 10-year drought? So now do I do is my decision making that I want to start in a 10-year drought, or do I want to just have one somewhere out there in the future to say it could happen, and it may happen as climate change really runs itself up in 25 years from now or 20 years from now? Are we really there yet? And I don't know the answers to that, but
I'd just like to remind us all that, I mean, the governor's representative at the Coastal Commission hearing on the desal plan, I mean, this was basically the message is we have to prepare for the worst because of climate. He used aridification, he used that word over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that's going to happen to the Monterey Peninsula. It may very well just be that most likely future is more uneven precipitation year to year, but I don't know. Maybe we should think about, even if it's not required, another of more frequent 5-year droughts, or one longer drought in the time frame, some scenario like that has a worse drought scenario. And
Well,
just
what's interesting is if you took one of these scenarios that still made it through the entire hydrologic cycle
Mhm.
and put a new 10-year drought out there, maybe where there used to be a 2-year drought, it may not move the needle that much. I mean, it may bring us down to, another one at 30 years. Whereas if I move it to this scenario, the worst of the worst, it might shorten us up to 10 or 15 years. And it might be worth looking at both, just for the heck of it, because that would be an admission that the future could be different than the past. I think that Cal-Am was a little disingenuous in their earlier testimony in that they said there's a trend of diminishing stream flow in the Carmel River. So you should expect that trend to continue, which leads to what you're saying. But unfortunately, if you look at the trend of the 20 years prior to 1963, it showed that stream flow was actually increasing in the middle period, the 60s and 70s. And so there really aren't any trends to be seen in the Carmel River stream flows. What we found, and I think we put this in testimony, Fran, you may not remember it, but I think we said we tried to debunk that, saying, no, in fact, the data shows that there was a trend upward in flow, then a flatness, and then a decline. And so it could just as easily be back up again. But yeah, I think that's a interesting concept, which is just wing it, throw in a 10-year drought. So I'll see what that does.
Go ahead there, George.
I had a question about it. I forgot the early part of your presentation, but do you make the point that the actual demand numbers pre CDO was 17 acre feet, whatever that number?
Yeah, 16 and change. Yeah.
Yeah, and is that that should be part of the presentation, and I think you should be able to refer back to that periodically. I don't know. I think that's important data for the PUC to kind of swallow.
Well, the interesting tidbit on that data is when I used it before, I had certain city people like Mayor Bill Camp say, well, that's not fair, because we were already water constrained in the city of Pacific Grove. And I said, well, I guess you're right. And others that weren't water constrained maybe were constrained by the inability to set a meter during the CDO. But pre to the CDO, there were no constraints on setting the meters. So some cities that were pro-growth could have done anything they wanted, but the overall growth rate was still that 16%. At that time, rather than try to separate them out and figure out who grew at what rate, that was the time I went to the city managers and I said, oh, well, do you have something better you want to share with us? And none of them could come up with a better forecast. But there was just some pushback on, well, 16 was probably understated because we didn't have enough water. But I think it's important. I think it's really interesting that, Sand City created an entitlement of 206 acre feet of available water, and they created it 15 years ago. And they're pro-growth. They can set meters, no moratorium on their entitlement, and they still haven't used up 10 acre feet of it. And they just went over 10 acre feet recently, and they're going to go over it with this Marriott hotel. But again, it took 15 years to get here, and this is a pro-growth environment with no moratorium on meters and with raw land available. So I just, I think that the expectations of the various planners, pro-growth people, chambers, they're just over-optimistic. We are doing infill on the Monterey Peninsula. The only raw land is the Fort Ord land, and that's not Cal-Am. And so it's,
But
You know,
but
yeah.
but my point though, Dave, is that it's an argument that builds or provides background as a database for the projection that you're presenting for the future, and it shows that there was less action than all the advocates had. I mean, they're advocating today for more.
yeah, it should create.
But
a
even
seed
when
of
they
doubt.
had full option to advocate everything possible.
Yep.
They were only growing at 16 plus.
No, I agree with you, and I'll try to weave that into our testimony because in my mind, it creates that doubt that, okay, now you've doubled it, now you've even tripled residential growth. How realistic is that if you were at half of that?
Yeah. I had another question just on the format, the presentation. Your title is 59 years of history. You started in 1985. So I did a quick math, and it's 35 years if you start in 1985, something like that.
Yeah.
And then halfway through, you pick up from 63, I think you said. I don't know if there's a way to present it a little differently so that the break in the years I just didn't know where to look for. Well, where's the whole picture?
Yeah, it's confusing. And that's why you shouldn't get into hydrology. Or I shouldn't take you there. Let's put it that way. Let me, again, to hop into the weeds, these actually will be part of the report. These will be, appendices. So there's testimony, there's attachments, and within the attachments, there will be exhibits. And so these will be exhibits to the attachment that talks about the supply assessment that we do. But if you want to start in drought, then, and 5 years of drought, then it makes sense to start in 1987, as we talked about. But then you get to the last year, and we actually have a 2022 data point and a 2023 data point, but Cal-Am does not. And so one of the stakes we're putting in the ground is, oh, fine, we will use Cal-Am's numbers. And frankly, Cal-Am's numbers don't come out to an average of 1,300 acre feet per year. It comes out to about 1,210 acre feet per year. But we're going to use Cal-Am's database. But so then you get to 2021, and that's when you have to go back to 63 to get back to 86. So yeah, we split the chronology in half so you could start in the period that has 5 years. Now that's not atypical. Other things that data crunchers like us do is, if you only had 30 years worth of data, you could take the 30-year series and then repeat it. So you'd have the same series twice. We do things like that all the time. It's just
well, just in terms of presentation, it seems to me if you could start in 1963, I'm sorry, and say, but for purposes of worst case scenario, we have picked the worst years in that whole cycle and begun our analysis from the worst possible position. And that helps make the case that you picked this, not that you started there because it was there. You
Right.
picked it out of 59 years worth of data.
Yeah, I think, we're just starting our writing.
Just
right
a
now.
thought, Dave.
Yeah, but we definitely need to explain it.
So
Or
Dave,
not explain it and gloss over it and just get to the conclusions. And then when somebody wants to really peel away the onion, we can get there. I'm not really sure yet what it's going to look like.
So Dave, you gonna redefine this? Is this gonna go to the full board anytime? Or just?
I don't, yeah, I don't think it will, because we, oh, Fran, re-enlighten me, when's this due?
I believe our due date is the 22nd.
Yeah, it's
I
due
am
the day of the board
confirming.
meeting.
Wait a minute.
I have it.
Yes, yes, your
Yes.
supplemental testimony will be due on Monday, January 22nd.
Okay, so this is all new. So they're about to get testimony for the hearing coming up, or they're just spinning their wheels again?
No. This is in preparation for an evidentiary hearing that will start in the middle of March. And we argued vigorously along with our friends at City of Marina and Marina Coast Water District for an opportunity to provide supplemental testimony. And so we had it, Cal-Am already submitted theirs, which was not, I'll say basically a regurgitation of what we had already seen. And now our opportunity comes on the 22nd. This issue of supply and demand will be primarily Cal-Am, MPWMD, and Monterey One Water. Monterey One Water on the issue of the source waters, which Cal-Am continues to say are deficient. And obviously, we, with our history of the knowledge of the resources and what Dave showed you today.
Okay, just one more from me on this one. Mr. Laredo, you gonna bring us up to date on this? You know, we've been asking about it, and people have been asking about it, and it looked like we're about to move on it. So we're gonna get an update at the next board meeting on this?
We can do so, yes.
Yeah, well, we got the vice chair here now. Could you make sure that's on the agenda, George? So we can fill people in and say we are moving on supply and demand a little bit, so.
And
That'd be good to
Fran,
know.
what's the target hearing date with the PUC? Is it April?
March.
March? Oh, wow.
March.
And that'd be good news.
On this case, the long-term supply and demand.
The phase 2 hearings, they've reserved 5 days from March 11th through the 15th.
Yeah.
Okay. Dave, you got any more?
Those hearings are based on the testimony that will already have been filed. So that's the opportunity to cross-examine or to argue issues. But the evidence is in the testimony that will have been filed.
But the cross-examination will be important.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay. General Manager, you have anything else on this item before we move
No,
to?
just wanted to give you a flavor for what we're seeing.
Okay.
And, you know, reinforce that it will continue to create confusion because it'll be, they say one thing, we say the other. And,
All right, let's make sure we emphasize that we are the management of these systems, so.
well, and I think what you'll find in our testimony, which will be a little bit different than Chris Cook's testimony, is that we will cite the sections of the water code that this kind of analysis is compliant with. We're probably not going to get into the detail on maximum day and peak hour, other than to say there's so much water in the ground that the cheapest way to access it for peak needs is by ensuring that you've got another well, that it's cheaper to build a well than it is to build a desal plant.
Okay. Any other questions before I ask the public for any comments? If none, Sarah, let's ask the public, but do they have any comments on this item?
Chair Edwards, I see no raised hands.
Thank you. Okay, GM, let's go to the third item.
Okay, item number 3 is just an idea that we want to run past you to see if you'd like us to spec out some details and bring it to the board. John Lear is sick today. Maureen Hamilton, district engineer, is winging her way to the, well, no, she's already there. She's at the college football championship game in Houston as a Washington alumni.
Good for her.
Oh, man, lucky.
Yeah, so they're not here to talk about it, but the idea here is, and we just, we touched about it just now, saying, Cal-Am's telling us their data shows that the best we could do is 17 acre-feet per day for injection to ASR. We know that if we don't have access to ASR's well number 3 and 4, that we can only do maybe 13 acre-feet, 12 to 13. We know that as they added mercury treatment to ASR well number 4, the permit from the Division of Drinking Water did not readily say that you can continue to use it in both injection and extraction mode. And in order to get back to using it like an ASR well, assuming that they build sufficient redundancy, is going to take another effort with the Division of Drinking Water, which could take a year. And we also know that when they put the well together with the mercury treatment, they took out what's called the Baskey valve, which allows you to do injection. So it can't even be used like an injection well at this point. So our team said, why don't we remove the problem from ASR well 3 and 4, which are owned by Cal-Am, and if the board is interested, we could come up with a 3rd injection well within the existing footprint of our Santa Margarita site that would allow us to, maximize. It's not maximizing as if we've got access to the Monterey pipeline, but maximize the 17 when water's available. And we could sink another injection well, solely injection, at the Santa Margarita site. And if there's an appetite for that, we would develop specifications and a preliminary budget and bring it back to the board for additional direction.
So, okay, we would drill the well.
Yep.
Is it going to be our well?
Yep.
And is it going to be just for what you say, extraction or
Only for injection.
only for injection? It will be our well?
Yep.
Will Pure Water Monterey be going into it?
Nope.
Just strictly ASR?
Yeah, it would get plumbed into, these are all well couplets. So 1 and 2 are plumbed together, 3 and 4 are plumbed together, which is why you can't inject in 4 while extracting in 3. So in effect, we would be plumbing 1 and 2 together with I don't know what we'd name it, probably 5. And we would then have the ability to, and all of those wells would be injection only at this point due to the travel time concerns we have with extracting from 1 and 2, and this issue that we've had when we took ASR well number 1 away from Cal-Am as an extraction well. So we would just simply have 3 injection wells instead of the 2 that we currently have.
Okay, and cost will be just about what? $1 million?
Well, that I don't know, but I think if you grab $1 million and think about it, you'd be asking the question, is it worth $1 million in construction dollars to get an extra 4 to 5 acre feet of injection capacity per day during the injection season, which, in a good wet year, that would be over 500 acre feet.
Any other questions? Karen, you're on mute.
Director Paul, you're on mute.
Yes, I was just wondering how much of a help it would be likely to be in times of heavy rain when there's a potential for more injection and more storage.
Yeah, so let's just say on average, we'll ignore that 75% scenario where something bad is happening in the Carmel Valley. And we're just over here saying, okay, all the water we can move from the Carmel Valley is coming up over the hill. So let's assume it can get us 5 acre-feet per day. You've got 180 days in a really good year, but let's say we never really have many of those. So just say 100 days. There's your 500 acre-feet, but only in extremely wet and above normal years. And those only happen 37% of the time.
Fran has something to say about that.
Are we still constrained to the Segunda pipeline?
Yes.
Can it handle that additional water?
Yep.
Same.
So the one thing that we and Cal-Am agree on, although slightly different, we think the Segunda pipeline maxes out, especially given a little sliver of water is peeled off to serve Ryan Ranch and Bishop now. That would get us about 18 acre-feet, whereas Cal-Am says it can max out at 17. So in a really, really wet year, you can have multiple days in a row where we're doing 17 acre-feet per day. But without ASR 3, we're topped out at 13 to 13.3. And so let's say it's 13, let's say it's 12 to 13. And if the real limit is 18, that's 5 to 6 additional acre-feet per day in extremely wet conditions, and which doesn't happen all the time. So, the extremely wet, each of those are 12.5% of the time or the data set. So that'd be, a quarter of your years, you would use that additional well. And in 3/4 of the years, you've got $1 million investment not being utilized.
Is that a quarter of the entire year or the rainy season?
Of the rainy season.
Yeah, okay.
But of course, dry and critically dry are another 25%. And so, 25% of the time you won't be using all 3 of those wells.
Yeah.
So, that investment always goes unutilized in the dry period.
Yeah.
So David, it wouldn't make sense to do it both ways. Extract.
No, because we'd be sticking it in kind of right in the sweet spot of where if you extract from any of those wells, well 1, 2, or this well 5, you would be speeding up the Pure Water Monterey travel times.
Okay. So when would you have this mapped out?
I think we'd have a rough estimate. We could probably slip it into the January 22nd board meeting, but I don't see any real need to hurry. So I think we could.
I see a real need to hurry because Cal-Am can't get a well drilled. So if we can do it faster, let's show that we can do it faster.
Yeah, I think
Get it done.
The key thing is we wouldn't be able to take advantage of a wet year this winter.
Right, but next year.
But if we could get it done prior to next winter, having it done by December 1st. Yeah, let me talk to Maureen and John about what's the latest, and yeah, we'll.
I would like the Director Edwards would like to see something or hear about it so we can budget for it and get it done. Let the board vote, let the public, I just believe that we ought to move ahead and show the public that if it takes to drill a well, we can do it, and we can do it in smart and good time. From hearing what Cal-Am haven't drilled a well since when. So that's just my thoughts.
Well, and I think you're right. So let me just get the timing worked out with those guys when they're back in the office, because we do have a mid-year budget coming up in February, and so we could add preliminary work on that to the mid-year budget, and then make it a budget item for next year for construction, or if need be, just break it into 2 years and put a piece of it in the mid-year budget for the rest of this year. So, yeah, I'll talk to him. If I think I saw nodding of, let's take a look at this harder.
Yeah, I want to support that, but I just have a small caveat. I think the criticism of the public is that the district is going down an expensive road with acquiring CalAm, and here's another expense that may or may not be particularly useful. I mean, I'm just thinking of the opposition now, and particularly they can argue that CalAm's already looking at this, but well, you know, if CalAm's on a slow walk of whatever they do, and we can find a little faster track to get on everything, then that just that benefits us, I think, even though the argument may be, you know, a little callous, but nevertheless,
I
I
have
support where
to,
we're going.
go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I'm interested too, but my caveat, it's a little different. It's that I would, I think it's worth for staff to look into it more closely and crunch numbers and do some type of cost benefit analysis so that the board can understand, you know, what approximately what the investment would be, and, you know, consider this fact that it would be only used in wet years, wet days. You know, so we can weigh whether the investment makes sense with
Yeah.
more information.
Yeah, one thing I would add, just along the lines of the narrative, is if our approach is basically what our water supply assessment in the prior item says, is if you use stored water, there's plenty of water, then having greater redundancy on storing water helps with that narrative.
Mhm.
So it's, you know, it's much more in line with what we just talked about moving forward. If you're not going to have a desal plant, probably makes sense to have another injection well just to have around. But
And in anticipation of more uneven rainfall also.
yeah,
That makes it more important to store as much as we can when it rains.
yeah.
Well, and then just if I can add another comment, some of the people I talk to and some of the meetings I go to, you know, I get hammered a lot in the name of David Stolt, but
Oh, well, you're welcome.
for the benefit of David Stolt. Anyway, the one thing that's constantly criticized is the 1300 ASR number, and I think, you know, you may look at that over, you know, 25, 30, I mean, whatever, the period of time that we've had it available. And the water volume looks good in the long-term history, but if you just look the last 10 years and so on, it's highly speculative about whether we can still expect 1300. So all I'm kind of making the point is that if we can make some investment, or at least consider expanding the amount of ASR water that could be captured, we will be addressing that issue. And it is a common criticism that I hear about. That's all I want to pass on.
Well, you know, it's the old saying, it's the price of doing business. And one thing that we are trying to look at is becoming a water company, buying a water company, but we're going to have to improve on that water company. Right now, CalAm getting the money, but they're not improving. So I say we go ahead and do the research and talk about it at the board level and let the public know. Even though we're buying a water, trying to buy a water company, we still need to improve this system right now and work towards that. So go ahead, Fran.
George, I just wonder when they're critical of the 1,300 acre feet for ASR on average, do they ever recognize the problems with CalAm's existing system, which
No.
diminish the value of it?
It's never mentioned. CalAm's sitting in the same meeting and nothing comes up about that. And I
Well-
don't try to be defensive. I just let them talk because I'm there to listen anyway.
Yeah,
And
I'll be,
wells are fundamental. And just as a reminder, in 2016, when CalAm filed No, I take it back. In 2019, when CalAm filed their general rate case, they said we need a new well in Carmel Valley. And they were looking at Rancho Cañada. That was July 1st of 2019. How's that going, George? You know, how
Yeah,
long
that's my
does it
point.
take to drill a well? And
Yeah.
I would say the district had a very good history when they did ASR 1 and 2, as far as designing, constructing, and bringing them online. I firmly believe our staff could do it again if the cost benefit analysis and our understanding of the rainfalls now, I mean, if you look at weather reports worldwide, they can go from Australia is a beautiful example, you know, the longest drought they've ever experienced into decades, and then they're absolutely flooded out, you know, because Mother Nature is just having these vicious cycles. So I think we should anticipate that the rain cycles will be different, but the total amount that we glean from it will be comparable. And if you're looking at these tremendous downpours, and we certainly saw some last year, then you know having the extra injection well is worthwhile.
Yeah, and just in defense of the program, so you see on this page, this column here that I'm going up and down, this is the ASR acre feet that could have been produced in that year based on its rain, based on its stream flow. And so here are the 4 years, 2012 through 2015, and yeah, this is where people get hung up. Well, 2010 and 2011, how come you didn't get your 2200? Well, because at that point in time, we only had ASR wells number 1 and 2. We had just gotten our permit. 3 and 4 didn't become available till in this area. And of course, you can't inject in a year where there's no injectable rain, so you didn't get anything. Back here, it was all just a test program in early 204, 205. So you could have gotten 2,000 acre feet, but at this time we only had 1 well, and it was a test program. So we didn't get permitted until right in here. Then we had a drought, and we also had a permit regulator who said, well, we don't want you storing any water. Whatever water you store in the winter, we want you to use in the summer, because otherwise you're tapping the Carmel River at the expense of the fish. So they weren't even allowing the hard S in storage in ASR to be stored. And it wasn't until we came along in 2020 even that we now had Pure Water Monterey coming online. But it was really September of 2020, which means we were in the 21 water year. So you go into 2021, it was a dry year. 80 acre feet was the most we could have gotten. And we didn't get very much. But then in 2017, we had a great year. 2019, a pretty good year. So we got a lot of this theoretically available. But this is a horrible time to measure the performance of ASR, because we only had 1 well, then 2 wells, but not 4 wells. And then we had 4 wells, but no storage. And then we had storage, but no rain. And, you know, so you go back and you look over this entire history, which means the entire column of 59 years, and you add it up and divide by 59, the average yield would be 1,210 acre feet. And that's using CalAm's calculated numbers from their testimony. Our numbers come to the 1,300 that we keep talking about. But even if we're willing to say, fine, we'll use your numbers, what we're arguing about is the difference between 1,300 and 1,210, not 1,300 and 470 or 430 or whatever the most recent number they threw into their testimony, because they ignored the carryover storage. But their numbers over 59 years show that the project should be able to yield on average 1,210 acre feet.
Okay, and Dave, I'm glad it took a long round robin to get here, but I appreciate now that the historical numbers of ASR are the potential water that's available. The ASR specific is how do we get it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the hardest part is to take a spreadsheet like that and then sit a realtor down or a loan officer down or someone else who's not a quant and have them go, oh.
Okay,
Takes a lot of
Dave,
work.
any more comments on this? Sarah, let's take this one out to the public before we get in trouble.
Chair Edwards, I see no raised hands.
Thank you, Sarah. What's the next item, Jim?
So the next item is just a summary of a December 6th coordination meeting with CalAm. And I just wanted to give you a quick overview that we did meet. It was myself, Marine Hamilton District Engineer, John Lear, with 5 CalAm people, including Chris Cook, Mike McGretto, who's an operator, Alyssa Kaspersky, and Tim O'Halloran, who are engineers who understand this stuff. And we went through 7 agenda items. The first agenda item was the well program in general. They have pockets of money that they ask for new wells, replacement wells, and refurbishment or rehabilitation. And we asked about the progress in each of those. And there were things like where they had recently rehabbed a well and the rehab didn't get them a whole lot of new or restore a whole lot of capacity. So they really need to replace that well, but they're going to put off replacement until we get through the ASR season so that we're not without a well, that we have a well that doesn't perform as well as we might like it to, but at least it'll be available. So we had a lot of that kind of discussion. We discussed the Pure Water Monterey expansion extraction wells and the status of the mercury and some of the conditions that I've already related to you on well number 4. And well number 4 was a separate item. Then we talked, the 4th item we talked about was readiness for ASR for the winter, and whether we will be readier than we were last year, and we were pretty ready. And here we sit, and we haven't injected drop number 1 because we haven't hit a day where we've averaged more than 120 cubic feet per second at the Highway 1 gauge. And if we have a neat new little feature on our website on all the river gauges, and you can kind of go in there and look at the Highway 1, and you'll see it got rolling a few times, but it has to sustain 120 CFS for a full day before we can begin, and that has not happened yet.
But are we readier? Like if we had had more rain, would we have done better?
Yeah. And we weren't unready last time, but the first day that we could have really gone at it, guys were still out flipping valves and turning switches, and we lost really kind of a day and a half. That's not that big of a loss, but it's probably on the order of 17 to 20 acre feet that we could have had. Then we talked about supply source dispatching during the year. Specifically, the concern that we had about them leaving water in the river and tapping ASR instead, which we equated a little bit to like burning your paycheck and taking an equivalent amount out of your savings, which just doesn't make sense. You should spend your paycheck first and your savings last. And we raised the question of whether or not they could, within a year, bank more Pure Water Monterey water, rely harder on the river, and then come back and start taking more Pure Water Monterey water. you know, this is kind of a spreadsheet exercise where it looks like the numbers pencil out. We, the district, are less familiar with their constraints and pressure zones and other seasonal demand items. So we just asked them to think about it, because it would be a really bad look to do it again. And then they're working on an interconnection with Marina Coast Water District, and we wanted an update as to where that's going, because we need that to happen for the emergency response plan related to Pure Water Monterey. And I honestly think that if we had relied on plumbing and worked with Marina Coast, we'd be closer to an agreement. But I think they are getting there. You know, we had indication that that they're kind of both on the same page with agreement language, and now it just needs to be finalized and then run through the legal department and so forth. But then actually constructing the physical interconnection and getting that done will have its own timeline. And then the last item we talked about was just dealing with the Presidio of Monterey on a letter they sent regarding Fitch Park wells, extraction wells 3 and 4, and what additional data might be needed there. Two things I want to kind of highlight is the schools, which control the easements for extraction wells 1 and 2, seem to want to find a way to maybe do turf replacement with, you know, replacing grass with artificial turf, and think that maybe we are the key to that. Unfortunately, the Seaside Middle School is actually in Marina Coast Water District's service territory. So, you know, we've done a lot for Monterey Peninsula Unified School District conservation efforts. I mean, we've given them rebate monies.
Yeah, big time.
Big time. And we've also replaced living turf with, you know, our rebate is not to replace living turf with AstroTurf and make everybody angry about crushed rubber and those things. Our rebate is the removal of turf, and if they replace it with something else, that, you know, that's not. I mean, I would assume that's a little bit like us promoting delis using disposable silverware so that they don't use more water, and creating a problem for the solid waste people. You know, it's everywhere we try something, there seems to be a counterbalancing negative. But irrespective of whether you like false turf or not, it seems like Monterey Peninsula would like to replace it. I can't find an easy way. You know, I suggested to Cal-Am, well, shoot, why don't you just raise how much you're going to pay them for the easement to cover the project or a portion of the project. And the easement itself is found money for them. So just by virtue of coming up with a value and turning over that value to them for the easement should cover quite a bit of, you know, new turf. But if it doesn't get them all the way there, I'm not sure we've got a way to put money in their hands. And my idea of, well, you know, establish a cost for the easement that includes it, you know, Tim pushed back and said, well, you know, we can't pay more than the appraised value. And I thought, well, go look at your acquisition of Bellflower, and I think you paid for a park and, you know, a few other little ornaments on the tree, so to speak. So anyway, there may be a sticking point there. They are in on a right of entry to do the test well. I just worry they don't move fast enough.
This is EW 1 and 2, right?
Right.
And then what was your explanation on the Presidio with Fitch?
So on the Presidio, they sent us a letter basically saying, why here and why on our property? You know, why is that so important? And we've offered to help Cal-Am with some data. I said, you know, we have to have something from back in the Joe Oliver era where we said, show them a diagram of the sweet spot, because it was one of the properties that were in the sweet spot of the best place to inject.
Absolutely. Cal-Am sites, I think it was a 2016. I'll find that, Dave. They've already got it, and that's why that site was developed for ESR, but Cal-Am is now saying it's perfect for their extraction wells. They have.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
I'll find that.
But a lot of it's just been testimony and statements, and I said,
No, there was a study. I don't know if it was
Yeah.
Pueblo or somebody, but they did a test borehole, I think in 2016, and the depth of everything came out perfectly. It was the right spot. I'll find it.
Okay. So those were the issues, and I think it was a good example of us again trying to work in a coordinated fashion for the greater good. My concerns are, I don't think they work at the same pace that we would like to see things done. But
even if water is flowing, we still can't inject and backfill.
right. Yeah.
Test the system.
Yeah, it's more our water rights right now that's coming into play.
Okay, I know when you're going to give your general manager report, you're going to give an update on that, so the public can know. We're not putting water in the ground now, but when we do, I hope we let everybody know.
Yeah, let me and then I'll let you all go. We don't have anything to report on the next item, so this is really kind of it. But
Okay.
if you look at our website now, and by the way, we'll have a new website in a few months, but the existing website has this new little thing up here called hydrologic data. And it's a really powerful tool for looking at stream gauges, reservoir levels, and rainfall. We used to report some of it, we report more of it now. And so if you go to this nifty little chart, this is the lagoon. So the first one in is the Highway 1 gate. And these are the flow levels. So this is, since January 1, right? So you can see we've gotten close to 90 cubic feet per second. There's 87. Early January, just a week ago, not even a week ago, just a few days ago. And if I decide to go back to the beginning of December, which is the beginning of the ASR season, you can see we've hit over 80 a couple of times. Well, if the lagoon hadn't opened, we would be held to 40 CFS. But when the lagoon opens, that's what's called an attraction event. And there's the possibility of steelhead who are sitting out there wanting to come in to spawn. They see the lagoon open, they make their move into the lagoon, and then they realize, maybe there's not enough flow for me to go up the river, so I'm going to hang here in the lagoon for a while. So the presumption is, once the lagoon opens, you probably have steelhead sitting in the lagoon and wanting to go up the river. Well, so once that happens, instead of 40 CFS, which all this time we could have been banking water, now you're held to 120 CFS, which is up here. And we haven't gotten there yet on a sustained fashion. And so it'll take another rainstorm to bring this flow back up. You need one day at 120, then you can back flush and clean everything out. But then ultimately you want such saturation in the watershed that 2 to 3 rains in a row keeps it at 120 at Highway 1. And we're just, we're not there yet. We topped out at 87. So hopefully we get there.
Okay.
Pretty cool thing though. So go to our website and play around in there. You can see all sorts of good stuff.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead there, Ken.
To go back for a second to the meeting with Cal-Am and your discussion about spending your paycheck before you dig into your bank account. What kind of response did you get to that point?
Well, mostly let me see who's left on here.
He's on there.
Yes.
Um,
I'm guessing we'll commit.
there's an understanding, and there's an understanding that what happened last year was not something that should
Happen again.
happen again or be repeated, at least not at that level. I don't know yet that they know what to do about it. But it's nonsensical to spend, 850 acre feet of savings and leave 950 acre feet of real flowing water that only flows one time in there. And I think that depending on the level, some people are more politically correct than others. So I think we got pretty good politically correct answers in that meeting. But I think that we've got the impression from a couple of other instances that they don't want to have that happen again either. So, let's just assume everybody's trying to figure out how to minimize that out this next go around.
Well, you know how I feel about it. You put something on the books, they know what's going to happen, and we haven't done that. We patting them on the head and said, don't do it again. But if I feel if we put something on the books, even though we don't use it,
I think
they know
it may make a difference that they know that we've called attention to this problem, and that definitely not in the interest of storing water and ratepayer interest cost issues. So it would be kind of embarrassing if they continue to do it anyway.
Karen, it would be embarrassing to us because we can do something about it. But I don't think we're really willing to take that step and put something on an ordinance out there that say, if this happened, this is going to happen. So, I believe in diplomacy, but it comes a point you gotta add something to that. It's like drilling that well. I can hear them talking about drilling wells till the moon turn blue. And then it comes to the point of doing it. I say, let's do it and let's get it done and show we can get it done. All right, I made my commentary. That's my last commentary for this year on this committee because I won't be on it next year. George, go ahead.
Real quickly, I'm glad to hear, Dave, that Marina and Cal-Am can discuss without a chaperone. Historically. Second point is I read something in the paper that the state, I forget which agency in the state, approved direct potable use.
They did.
Reuse.
Yep.
And I'm just curious about what's your estimate of the timeline for getting regs out or whatever that process is.
Yeah, I think it'll take probably a year to finalize the regs. But the release that you're talking about, which is like, I don't know, a month and a half ago, I think that was the version of the regs. But figuring out how to actually design it compliant to the regs, you're going to have to put something on the front end anyway. So the fact that we knew this day was coming, that, we would have, we like to joke, we could have saved $40 million on the injection field. That's not necessarily true. We would have spent it on holding tanks and, front end things. But there may be an opportunity here for us to change the way we do injection at the existing facilities and leverage up the direct potable regs. And it has to do again with travel time and so forth. But, there's virus log removal issues. There's a whole bunch of things that have to be examined. I think, we just have to recognize that we wanted to do this project when there weren't direct potable reuse regs, and we designed a project that is not, and just accept all the cost and operating constraints that go with that. But it's not like even the expansion could be changed at this point. There's some potential, I think, for Marina Coast's second piece. They're getting, roughly I guess, 600 acre feet now from the plant to fully leverage their remaining 800 and, then I'll get this number wrong, 832 or 800 and whatever it is. They might need to participate in an expansion, another expansion. And, maybe it could be designed to be direct for that purpose. I really don't know.
Anyway, I was just curious about the
Yeah.
timing. Okay, thank you for just
Well-
an update.
Further along down the road there, I don't know if you could come to, if M1 Water can come to our board and tell us about that direct, if anything in the future we can do about it, so.
I will, I'll talk to them.
Yeah, please do. Is that all we have? Anything from the public out there on this one? This was 4 and 5.
Chair
Right.
Edwards, Chair Edwards, I see no raised hands.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's anything else, GM? If not,
That is it.
good meeting.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Good luck, Karen. You're the next chair of this.
I'll need it.
Good.
All right, bye-bye.
Thanks,
Night
Alan.
all.
Yeah, you
Bye,
welcome.
everyone.